Good morning. Today we are going to see the distinction between SALE and SELL, that is sale and sell. Okay. Now we will go point wise. The first point is what? Transfer of property. See, in contract of sale, the contract is completed. There is no condition, there is no fixed time and all, nothing is remaining. It is a complete executed contract. It is an absolute contract. Vested rights are being created. So, the transfer of property takes place, already has taken place at the time of contract. You can say the property in the goods has passed, means the ownership has passed from the seller to the buyer immediately at the time of contract. But in agreement to sell, the general property in the goods, it is not yet transferred. It will get transferred in some future date or when the condition is being fulfilled. So this is the first difference, you can say. Property in the goods passes from the seller to the buyer immediately in SALE, and the property will pass only after fulfillment of certain condition, or you can say at some future time or future date, that is in SELL. Okay, this is first difference between SALE and SELL, and that's very important. Property in the goods has passed means now the buyer is the owner in contract of sale. Property in the goods has not passed means yet the buyer is not the owner. Today also, at the time of agreement, who is the owner? The owner is the seller itself. So when ownership has passed, that is SALE. When ownership is yet to be transferred, it is SELL. Okay, this is the first. Next is type of goods. In contract of sale, the types of goods which are being involved are existing goods, or you can say specific goods, means the seller is having the possession of the goods. The seller is going to have the right to sell also the goods. That is in SALE. While in sell, the seller may not have the possession, may not have the rights. So the goods involved in agreement to sell are, you can say, contingent goods or future goods. Future goods means when the seller is going to get it, the possession afterwards at some future time. Okay, so types of goods are different in SALE and SELL. Okay, now risk of loss. In contract of sale, as the ownership has passed to the buyer, after contract, if something happens to the goods, the risk is, the loss is of the buyer. But in agreement to sell, yet the ownership has not passed, the seller himself is the owner today also, or you can say at the time of agreement also. So if after agreement, if the goods are lost or damaged, the seller is you can say the seller is going to face the loss. The seller is taking that risk. So in SALE, the risk is of the buyer for damage, and in SELL, the risk is of the seller. Okay, so this is relating to risk of loss. Now you can say consequences of breach. See, after the contract has taken place, if the buyer makes a breach of contract or he fails to pay the price, then the seller can file a case. The seller can file a case for recovery of that price. Okay, because the ownership is passed, so he can recover the price. But in SELL, yet the ownership has not passed and the buyer has made a breach of contract, what the seller can do? Seller is in a good position because he is the owner now also. So just he can file a case for compensation and he cannot file a case for price. Okay, so consequences of breach are also different. See, now right to resell. Right to resell. Contract has taken place. SALE has taken place. The buyer is the owner. Okay. Now whether the seller is having a right to resell, then seller is not having right to resell because he is not the owner. If he sells, then the new buyer, the subsequent buyer, the transferee, will not get a good title because the seller is not the owner. Okay, because here it will be like sale by non-owners. He's a non-owner, he's not an owner and he is selling. Therefore, the new buyer will not get the title. However, in SALE also, in certain circumstances, the sailor can sell, the sailor can resell when he is an unpaid sailor, or when possession is with the sailor and the buyer has not taken the possession of the goods, though the sailor is insisting to take, he is not taking, then after giving notice and all, he can resell. Okay, so the general rule is what? The sailor in SALE cannot resell, but in SELL the sailor himself is a owner, so he can resell. So he is having, the general rule is different. In resell, the sailor can resell, the new buyer will get the title, but in SALE the buyer is the owner, therefore the sailor cannot resell unless in some exceptional circumstances. Okay, now this is relating to right to resell. The next is general and particular property. See, when SALE has taken place, all, you can say all the rights, means the ownership is bundle of rights, all the rights are being transferred. So you can say general property in the goods is transferred to the buyer in contract of sale, but in SELL, the general property is not transferred, only a right, a promise that I am going to sell the goods to you, that right is transferred, that is called as a particular property. A sale is a contract plus conveyance and creates just in rem, that is right against, you can say right against the whole world, you can say. He gives right to the buyer to enjoy the goods as against the world at large, including the sailor himself. An agreement to sell is merely a contract, pure and simple, and it only creates jus in personam, means it gives right to the buyer against the sailor only to sue for damages if the contract is not done. Okay, now this is relating to general and particular property, means in SALE there is transfer of general property, and in SELL there is transfer of particular property only. Okay, now if the buyer becomes insolvent, that we have to see. If buyer becomes insolvent, then what will happen in SALE and what will happen in SELL? See, now sailor and buyer are there, SALE has taken place, now the owner is the buyer. The buyer yet he has not paid money to seller, and before paying the money, the buyer becomes insolvent. Now if buyer becomes insolvent, what will happen? The buyer is not in a position to pay the money, isn't it? But the goods are his. He is the owner. So the goods can be taken by the official assignee, the court and all. And the sailor will get some proportionate rate the court will derive. Like he will be like a creditor. Means he will be the person who is going to take the money, and he will not get full amount because the buyer has become insolvent. He has not paid the money. But if the buyer pays the money and all, and afterward the buyer becomes insolvent, nothing happens to the sailor. See, now in SELL, in SELL, the buyer has become insolvent, but buyer is not the owner of the goods, so he can't take the goods, isn't it? Means the sailor is not affected in SELL because the sailor is the owner. We have to answer these questions only on this point, who is the owner. Okay, now here we have seen when the buyer becomes insolvent, what will happen in SALE and SELL. Okay, now the last is what we are going to see, what happens if the sailor becomes insolvent. See, now SALE has taken place and the sailor becomes insolvent. If the sailor becomes insolvent, nothing will happen because the ownership is already transferred to the buyer. The buyer will pay the money to the official assignee and the court. So nothing happens to the title of the buyer. Okay, and the sailor or his assignee gets the whole amount. But if it is SELL, if it is SELL, and the sailor becomes insolvent, the sailor himself is a owner and he became insolvent, and the buyer has given some token amount or deposit and all to the sailor, the buyer will not get the money, the full amount. He will get the proportionate rate only. So that is going to affect, means what will happen, he is not having a title also, and he will get only the proportionate amount. But if the buyer has not given anything to the seller, he has not paid the seller, then nothing will happen. Neither he is a owner, neither he is at loss. Okay, this is relating to insolvency of seller. In a sale, SALE, if the seller becomes insolvent, the buyer being the owner, he is entitled to recover the goods from the official assignee and he will pay the amount. In an agreement to sell, if the buyer who has paid the price finds that the seller becomes insolvent, he can only get the rateable dividend, that is a proportionate rate which the court is going to fix for the insolvent, and not the goods, because the property in the goods is yet to be passed, means the ownership in the goods is with the seller. See, this topic like insolvency of the buyer or insolvency of the seller or the risk and all, who is at loss, that we have to answer taking into consideration only one question: who is the owner? Whether seller is the owner or whether buyer is the owner. In SALE, buyer is the owner because ownership has passed, general property in the goods has passed. And in SELL, the seller is the owner, the ownership is yet to pass. Okay, today we have seen the difference between SALE and SELL. Okay, bye bye, see you.